This is the Central Oregon High Desert, vast and remote, home to few, but also a place of mystery. This is the story of the Oregon Backscatter Project. The Backscatter Project is located in a remote section of Central Oregon. For the longest time it appeared on no maps, but then Google Earth happened, and now it's there for everyone to see. So I first learned of the Backscatter Project by reading an article in the Oregonian, a regional newspaper, probably back in about 2001, 2002. I lived in Portland, Oregon at the time, and the Oregonian is considered the regional newspaper for most of Oregon. In those days, it was a pretty comprehensive paper, and just about everybody read it, and just about everybody read it from front to back. Somewhere tucked in there was an article about the Backscatter Project, a project that had been left over from the Cold War and had just recently, according to the newspaper article, been decommissioned. The Backscatter Project, as I said, was left over from the Cold War. It was a large radar system that could look over the horizon. And the concept is that it would give early warning to hostile planes or missiles coming in over the horizon. While it was devised in the middle of the Cold War, it wasn't actually built until the Cold War was coming to an end. And in fact, even though the site was built, it was never made fully operational. Everything was there, but it was decommissioned in the late 90s and finally broken up in the early 00s, much of the equipment being moved off-site. There are some reports that once it was decommissioned, it was transferred into an energy project, suggesting that there would be large solar arrays out there. Presumably the site was connected to the grid in order to power the site, and I guess the theory was that once it was connected to the grid, you put up some solar arrays and you can use it to feed back to the grid. So there were stories reported that it was sold to the Department of Energy. All right, what we have here is the official state highway map for the state of Oregon for 2020. And this will give you an idea as to what the journey is from Salem to the Backscatter Site. We live in Salem, which is right here. And one has to get to the Backscatter Site, which is out here. To get there, you have to get over the Cascades. There are limited options. It's a mountainous area, especially this time of year. Some of the roads are closed owing to the conditions and snow. But it's a 250-mile journey. Because of the terrain, it takes basically all day, and the Backscatter Site is out here. It's interesting to note that the Backscatter Site is not shown on the map. It's never been identified on the state highway map, even though just to the east of it is an obscure geological formation called the Crack in the Ground. That's identified in red letters, but the Backscatter Project site is not shown on the highway map. Here's a more detailed map that actually shows the Backscatter Site. East of Christmas Valley by 16 miles, and then north on an unnamed road for 9 miles. But the Backscatter Site is shown on this particular map. Though a day-long journey, 250 miles over the Cascades and out to Central Oregon is indeed not a light project. It's certainly doable, and so we did it. We grabbed the drone, we grabbed the camera equipment, we got into our Toyota RAV4, which is good for just about any road I want to drive, and we drove out to the Backscatter Site. One has to first find a small, can't even call it a village, it's a community called Christmas Valley. And once you get past Christmas Valley, 16 miles, you make a left onto an unmarked gravel road, which we did. And then you follow that gravel road to its end for over 9 miles, by the way. We got out there, and at the end of that road there was a chain link fence with a big padlock and a small sign that said, you know, no trespassing. And fine, we respect that. And so we stopped the car there, and I got out and started putting together the photo equipment and getting the drone ready and so on and so forth to do a little bit of an on-site report. Now, driving 9 miles on a dusty gravel road, our car was completely covered with dust, and this is an important thing to keep in mind. Before I could even get the camera equipment set up on a tripod and start my little vlog there on site, our late model Subaru drove up, also four-wheel drive, so you could take the road. But the interesting thing about the car that drove up was no dust. No dust meant that that car had come from a very close location, hadn't traveled very far on the gravel road. Fella gets out and basically tells us there's nothing to see here. The site's been decommissioned. Didn't really tell us to go away because, of course, we were on a public road right-of-way out in the middle of nowhere. But he seemed to have the keys to the padlock, at which point he unlocked the padlock, took down the chain link, and drove in onto the site. We were a little bit dumbfounded by all of this, and kind of looked at each other and tried to figure out, well, what are we supposed to be doing now? And fairly soon thereafter, the fella came off the site, stopped the car, locked the padlock, got the chain link fence up, and drove off on his way. At that point, I was finally able to set up the camera and do a little bit of a vlog from on site, and I'll play that for you now.
Good morning. We're out here at the site of the Oregon Backscatter radar system, which has been deactivated. It was built in the 1990s. It was a Cold War device. We're about as remote in Central Oregon as you can possibly get. I will try sending up the drone so that you can maybe take a look at what's out here, but there's not really much to see. We've already been visited by a person who told us that there was nothing to see here, and then he moved on into the property. So it's kind of an X-Files experience out here in the middle of kind of like nowhere. So I'll put up the drone.
So at this point of the story, it's appropriate for me to talk to you about the drone that I use. It has some characteristics which become part of the story. I do not use a DJI drone. DJI makes about 80% of the drones sold in the US these days. And DJI drones have what they call automatic geofencing. In other words, if you try to fly a DJI drone in an area where there is restricted airspace, it won't take off. My drone's a little different. It is an Autel drone and has full capabilities with a very sophisticated camera, and obviously you can see that it's pretty portable, arms fold up. But it's important to know that it is not geofenced. Autel takes the position that the drone pilot has the responsibility for knowing where you can fly and where you cannot, owing to restricted airspace. The other interesting thing about this particular drone, and I'll try to show it to you right here, is that, here we go, you do not need a telephone or a cell phone hooked up to the controller to be able to see where the drone is flying. The controller actually has its own display, so that, and I'm moving the drone around now, you can see that the display is right here on the controller. You don't need a separate cell phone connected up to it. I like this because it means that this particular drone can be set up very quickly, and you don't need a connection to the internet, either through a cell signal or through Wi-Fi, in order for everything to work, which is very good when you are trying to do work in central or eastern Oregon, because of the remote location there may not be a cell signal and certainly no Wi-Fi. But as a drone pilot, and I am a certified drone pilot, you're still responsible to make sure that you're not flying in restricted airspace, and there's a way to check on that. There's a cell phone app called AirMap. Let me get focus on it here. There we go. AirMap, you can bring it up, and I bring it up before I head into Eastern Oregon because there's no cell coverage in many areas, and I check the airspace. This particular screen is showing you the airspace right here in Salem, and that blue dot is restricted airspace because of the airport. So I do check to make sure that I'm not running into a restricted airspace. And by the way, Oregon has a lot of restricted airspace over the Cascades in particular because it's wilderness area, and that shows up as a solid red. And that's not a fly zone for drones because of the wildlife that's being protected, or simply because it is a wildlife area, and people out there in the wild do not want to have drones flying around, and that's fine. Now, I did check the airspace for the part of Christmas Valley where the Backscatter project is located, and no restrictions are shown. And any facility can ask the FAA for restricted airspace to be identified, and obviously places like schools and prisons have done that. But no restrictions are shown over the Backscatter site. So felt that we were good to go. And I would be able to get some drone footage of the site, at least being able to do a straight up from the public road, looking down onto the site and seeing if there's anything left there. And I did that. I tried lifting my drone off, and here's what happened. Come on.
Well, it won't initiate.
I figured.
Won't work. Isn't that a surprise?
After the failure of the drone to lift off and the little encounter that we had at the Backscatter site, I wanted to check who the actual owner of the site is. I went into the tax records for Lake County. Lake County, by the way, is almost the size of Delaware in terms of square miles, but it has less than 8,000 people in a total population, and 1/3 of those live in the county seat of Lakeview. So you can figure that this is an area that's pretty sparsely populated. Nevertheless, Lake County turns out to have a fairly robust tax assessor's research component on its website, and I was able to find information with regards to who the actual owner of the Backscatter site is. And you can see it here. I have it on a map. It shows up, and when you activate it, it tells you what the tax lot is, and it also indicates that the actual owner is the state of Oregon. It was interesting to me that it does not show which state agency happens to own it. So it's the state of Oregon, but it did give the address of the state agency, which is listed as, you gotta love it, 1776 Militia Way. That would be in Salem. State law requires all state agencies to be located in Salem, Oregon, the state capital. So when it says 1776 Militia Way, that's going to be a state agency and an address that's located in the state capital, the city of Salem, Oregon. Okay, I've loaded the address into the nav system, and we're going to drive out to 1776 Militia Way here in Salem and see what state agency is the present owner of the Backscatter array. I think I know who it is, but we're just going to go out there and check it out. I'm out here at 1776 Militia Way, and we now know the present owner of the Oregon Backscatter Array. It is the Oregon Military Department, better known as the National Guard. So while the site is supposedly deactivated, it's still within the hands of the military. So a little bit of a mystery solved. So one has to wonder about it all. If the Backscatter site is deactivated, how come a minder shows up to check us out right when we get there? How is it that a drone that's not confined by geofencing is unable to lift off at this remote site? If it's a restricted flight zone, why doesn't that show up on national databases such as AirMap? Why is the Oregon National Guard the owner of the site anyway? What's going on out there in the middle of nowhere?